Hey there, good people, it's your Crippled Critic, and I wanted to wish everyone a belated Merry Christmas or whatever holiday you celebrated this week. Hope everyone had an okay time hanging out with their families and friends, and maybe you got some good gifts. Anyway, this week I want to talk about the indie game The Darkest Dungeon. So, Darkest Dungeon is a roguelike turn-based RPG released on the PC, PlayStation Vita, and PlayStation 4, and I'm reviewing the PlayStation 4 version. Heavily inspired by H.P. Lovecraft, the game's story starts with the main character's grandfather narrating through a written letter. Your grandfather has squandered the family fortune in order to unearth a hidden power underneath the family estate, but this power unleashed unspeakable horrors on the manor and onto the world. As his last request, grandfather begs you to come home and fix his terrible mistake right before killing himself. Yeah, this game is dark. Get it? Darkest Dungeon was made by a small group of developers from an indie company in America called Red Hook Studios, though it was mostly funded by a Kickstarter effort a few years ago. The Darkest Dungeon can be a very hard game to play. This was done intentionally in order for you to experience the stress their characters are under when they go through dungeon after dungeon, fighting relentless monsters, and experiencing the deterioration of each character's mental state. One unique feature in the game is that when your characters die, they're gone for good. Once a character dies, there's no way to revive them. Any follower you have can die permanently. The gameplay in Darkest Dungeon mainly consists of you leveling up your characters through grinding in dungeons. You'll get new followers and find artifacts you can sell in order to help upgrade your characters. You'll also be doing a lot of upgrading to the base camp area, the town surrounding the manor. Building up parts of the town by checking boxes and changing stats. I'm explaining parts of the gameplay first because I think it's important for you to understand before I get into the accessibility options. I hesitate to complain much about the difficulty of the game, mostly because there are so many accessibility options that really do make the game less challenging, whether you're a disabled gamer or not. The options aren't perfect, but there are a lot of them. In the control options menu, you can turn on certain features that allow for buttons to have duplicate functions. For instance, you can turn on a feature that lets you use the left control stick to interact with more things. And you can make it so L2 doesn't have to be held down in order to get to different menus. A lot of the accessibility options have to do with whether or not you want tutorials on or certain warnings about what to bring with you on a quest, but there are a bunch of options that affect combat. For example, you can turn on a feature that actually lets you choose whether your characters will get stat penalties or not, and that includes stress levels. You can also turn on a feature that makes your retreating from battle work every time. Some of these accessibility options affect the combat so much that I didn't even turn them on because I wanted more of a challenge, but the fact that they're there is impressive and much appreciated by disabled gamers. The controls are fairly simple, but they do change depending on where you are. Darkest Dungeon being a turn-based RPG, you'll mostly just be accessing menus. You move to different icons and commands with the left control stick and press X to interact. Sometimes the directional pad opens your inventory and other times it's triangle, depending on whether you're in combat or not. Same goes for the trigger buttons, they can also access your inventory or your map depending on whether you're in combat or not. Sometimes the touchpad is even utilized to embark on a journey. Strangely, the right control stick is used to move to different rooms during a dungeon crawl, which seems a bit excessive. Why couldn't the left control stick do the exact same job? Still, with the accessibility options available, I don't see any problems for gamers with fine motor skill impairments. Disabled gamers with hearing impairments may have a little trouble playing Darkest Dungeon. Just like a lot of games with a horror aesthetic, a large portion of the atmosphere is in the music with Darkest Dungeon. So deaf players not being able to hear that will lose a little bit of the effect. The dark gothic visuals do help make up for it though. There are subtitles in Darkest Dungeon, but for some reason they're not automatically turned on. What I noticed is that the subtitles don't play during the long intro of the game, and you can't turn them on until it's over. This is unfortunate because a big part of what gets you pumped for the story in Darkest Dungeon is hearing the ghost grandpa give his creepy narration. Deaf players just take note that you can turn subtitles on afterwards, you'll just have to replay the intro in order to know what the hell is going on. Once you do turn subtitles on, you're also given the option to put them at the top or bottom of the screen, which is nice. The game also offers the option to change each individual level of sound, including music, background noises, and even narration. Darkest Dungeon has a dark atmosphere, but it's also visually dark. It's recommended during combat to use a torch to light your way, not just for sight, but enemies become more frequent as the torch gets weaker. For visually impaired gamers, there's a brightness feature you can change in the options menu. Although the game has lots of bright reds and browns, I didn't notice any color distinguishing icons or commands, so colorblind players shouldn't worry. Other than the intro and the ending, there isn't much story to speak of in Darkest Dungeon, just the gameplay. The game actually reminds me of a mixture between Oregon Trail and State of Decay. It's like Oregon Trail because you're going on quests, finding new people, and having to deal with different ailments that your party members get. And it's like State of Decay because it's survival horror, but also because you're having to build up your camp and check up on group morale. Not to mention, State of Decay had the same feature that made it so any of your characters can die for good. Sadly, after playing Darkest Dungeon for a few hours, it tends to lean more towards Oregon Trail, which means it's kind of repetitive after a while. Don't get me wrong, in State of Decay, once you understand the gameplay mechanics, it can get repetitive too, but in that game, the characters just felt more like valuable members of your team who are trying to fight to survive, while in Darkest Dungeon, they just feel like pawns on a chessboard. Sure, they talk occasionally and cry out to tell you what kind of ailment they have, but they ultimately have no personality. They're just mage, warrior, rogue. It doesn't help the Darkest Dungeon keeps spitting out tons and tons of party members for you to choose from, so none of them really feel special. The characters in State of Decay were far from amazing, but I don't know, if Darkest Dungeon had just put a little bit more backstory into each character, I might have cared more, but they just came off as generic. So it's weird, because on the one hand, I think it's great a developer took a stab at a turn-based RPG. I really like those games, I miss them, and it's sad because I think they're becoming a dying genre. And the Darkest Dungeon is really fun for the first few hours, but it just didn't have a lot of staying power to me. It's got a really cool art style and creepy music, so if you've liked what I've talked about it so far, then maybe this game is good for you. They definitely give you a lot of game for the money you spend. I've heard this can go over 50 hours. The accessibility options make the game less difficult for gamers with fine motor skill impairments, but disabled gamers with hearing impairments may have to fiddle around with the audio controls before they can enjoy the game. Alright guys, tell me what you think of Darkest Dungeon. Was it too difficult? Is the gameplay mechanics repetitive to you? Let me know in the comment section below. Sorry it took me so long to get this review out. Family and friend, holiday stuff, you guys know the deal. I've got a bunch of indie game reviews I gotta get caught up on, so look forward to those. Thanks for watching you guys, and I will see you later.